Welcome to the One-on-One Podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
So, back again, Mr. Joel Thomas here. What's up, dude? We're going to be talking about Dogmen. What do you got for us today?
Well, you know, you and I did an episode back in December of last year on the confessionals, on the members paywall, behind the paywall site, and we did ancient biblical dogmen. I think it was you, me, and Justin from Crypts of the Corn. And we broke down a lot of different aspects of dogmen throughout history. It wasn't just one particular type. You know, we talked about lycanthropy. We talked about the Cynocephali. We talked about, you know, the possibility of there being like beings that are just created that way too. Today, I kind of want to really dig into the Cynocephali, the dog-headed men, in general, because I've done more research since the last time that we talked, and I've got some really good stuff, especially when it comes to apocryphal text. So last time that I dug into it, I went for more of a historical angle, which we will talk about historical figures today, some of the ancient Greek philosophers and travelers, basically explorers like Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus, some of these different characters throughout history. We're definitely going to talk about their significance when it comes to the dog-headed men, the Cynocephali, Cynocephali. It's actually spelled all different ways depending on if you're talking from a plural position.
Cynocephali.
It actually is. It's with a Y.
It's homunculi.
And you actually wouldn't be wrong probably if you pronounced it homunculi either. I don't think it even matters really, but the spelling is 3 to 4 different ways that they spell it. And there'll be some other weird beings and cryptids we talk about today too that comes up when I'm digging into what these Cynocephali really were. And I think it's interesting enough to talk about, Juan, because you've got these major historical figures that are not only explorers or high-ranking military officers, but you've got high-ranking people in the church that talked about the Cynocephali as well. So, and some of their thoughts on what they could be and if they should be treated like mankind as far as their ability to connect to God and the spiritual world. Now, here's my personal opinion early on about Dogman. I just don't think it's one particular thing. I think it just depends on what you're running up on in whatever region of the world you're in. Now, the Cynocephali seem to be in one specific region. However, there are stories of them being in South America. I mean, obviously, we know stories here in North America of the Cynocephali, or at least the Dogman, coming up. So we're going to dig into a little bit of that today, but I really want to hone in on the Cynocephali, the dog-headed man as a whole. And I do want to talk about some of these apocryphal texts and then some historical significance and what it might mean for us today, because I know some people think of werewolves and lycanthropy. We're not going to get into that today because that's a whole other bag of worms when you're talking about the occult and the significance of lycans and werewolves.
You don't think it's the same, dude? You don't think it's the same concept, just a different name? Because I feel like, first of all, because Dogman is a hot topic, right? It's like super hot in the paranormal circles, and everyone talks about them, and yada yada yada. Do you think it's a blood and bones sort of thing, like? Or does that fall under what you said, that there's different aspects to it? There could be the spiritual, because in my studies of the occult, it feels like it's more of an imaginational sort of thing, putting yourself into a state of mind, into a trance, because even guys like Kenneth Grant talk about the magical lycanthrope, where it's like a frenzy that these guys would go, almost like a demonic possession, if you will. And then you have the concept of dog and God being very close together. Now, I'm not saying that God is a dog, but there's something to that, right? There's something to the phonetic Kabbalah, to the gematria, to all of that, which we know that these occult circles use. And so you don't think that lycanthrope and dog-headed men could be the same thing, bro? You think it's different?
As far as the dog-headed men we're going to talk about today, I do. So I will say the caveat is when people are running up on these things, I think it could be very well what you just talked about. So that goes into what I like to say, the lycanthrope projection. So say a person goes into a frenzied state or connects to an entity. This entity could project the image of whatever it wants to. So say someone's walking through the woods or going somewhere where, say there's a group of occultists practicing a ritual or something, they don't want people around. Maybe that projection's being sent out to ward people off from that area. A lot of stories about Dogman, what's very interesting is that you don't see a lot of dogmen eating people. You may hear stories of seeing a body or something like that, but generally speaking, it seems like they're just scaring people off from a specific region. Now, we're just talking about dogmen in North America, these type of stories that we hear now, right? The dog-headed man, the Cynocephali, is completely different historically because they were an actual tribe of people who bartered and traded with the Indians in India. So, and we're going to get into that today for sure. But you were talking about the occult, and oddly enough, I was going to get to that today, but I was going to talk about Manly P. Hall. And I hope your audience knows, he was a 33rd degree Freemasonic author. And he actually talks about the symbol of the dog. He says the dog, because of its faithfulness, denotes the relationship which should exist between disciple and master, or between the initiate and his God. The shepherd dog was a type of priestcraft. The dog's ability to sense and follow unseen persons for miles symbolized the transcendental power by which the philosopher follows the thread of truth through the labyrinth of earthly error. The dog is also the symbol of Mercury, and we know the dog star, Sirius, Sothis, was sacred to the Egyptians because it presaged the annual inundations of the Nile, and that also ties into some of these Egyptian gods. We talk about Amun-Ra. It said that the gods gathered as dogs around his feet. We know that Anubis was the god of the dead. He had the head of a jackal or dog, and he ruled the city of Cynopolis. So if we're talking about phonetics, Cynopolis, Cynocephalus, the Cynics, we'll talk about the Cynics today too, where that word cynic derived from, the etymology of that. But Anubis ruled the city of Cynocephalus, the city of dogs, where the dogs of the sun, dog priests, and dog kings resided. So if you think about it, it was always taught to us that these dog priests, dog kings, that was just a metaphor for this worship of Anubis. But as we look at these dog-headed men, were they dog-headed men? Were they actually some sort of hybridized version of man and beast that worshipped at the feet of Anubis? Now, if you want to get into what you might think Anubis was, I could go the fallen entity route or maybe the Nephilim route when you're talking about a god like that, whatever you want to call it, right? I even look at a lot of Sumerian texts, and we talk about the Anunnaki. And I think them and the fallen entities are one and the same. And that's a whole other conversation. But I don't think it's wrong to say Anunnaki or however you want to speak about it. I think they go by many different names, So I think, you could even go as far as into Gnosticism, which came, 300 years after Jesus, when it really hit its stride. And Gnosticism started talking about the archons. That was essentially the same thing, right? Gnosticism was what really brought about our first idea of being in a matrix. So to hone it back into Dogman, you've got these dog-headed priests, dog-headed kings. They're spilling out of Egypt. So out of this era of time is where you're going to start seeing a lot of these dog-headed men talked about, a lot of these Cynocephalists talked about. Now, for people that don't really know what Cynocephalists are, their characteristics are having the head of a canid, typically that of a dog or jackal. And obviously, it's widely attested that the mythical phenomena existing in many different forms and contexts. So again, this is talked about throughout history. It's not just one period of history. There'll be major gaps throughout history, almost 1,500 years, where these specific beings are talked about. And we're talking more modern era stuff, Juan. We're not talking about BC. We're talking AD.
Oh, dude. One of the things that, because everyone likes to talk about how we're in the apocalyptic times and the world's ending and there's so much chaos, and it's like, well, you should probably get off Twitter and probably get off X, get off Instagram and get off all these places and go touch some grass, and you'll notice that life is fine, right? It's whoever wants to be put in these reality tunnels, that's who it's gonna be bad for. So it's interesting because, right, you have the Gnostics who were heavily into alchemy. One of their patron saints was Hermes Trismegistus. And part of alchemy is the chimera as well, where they could have, in my opinion, been experimenting with genetic splicing, hybridization, et cetera, which they do today with animals. I mean, there's the talk of not breeding certain sheep and other animals in the Bible, certain cloths that you're not supposed to mix together. It's all in the Bible. And it's interesting that Paracelsus predicted the end times through what he called, right, what I've dubbed Paracelsian prophecies, where he talked about that once you start to see these beasts rise from the ground, from the earth, you will know that these are the end times, or it's the prediction of the fall of an empire coming up. And that was 1600, 1500, 16th century, whenever he was writing that. I mean, he wrote about it, about the elementals and all these monstrosities. Giants. He talked about giants as well. So, yeah, dude, you're right. It's not just old accounts. And then if you want to count all the people who allegedly say they've seen Dogmen today in the LBL and all these other places, which I'm sure, I mean, you guys have gone hunting for the Dogman based on accounts that people have talked about. So is it a figment of the imagination? Is it something more? I don't know, man. And I don't know if I'm going to make up my mind until I see something. There was did you see the recent picture that came out? I think the guys from Hollow Sky posted it. I mean,
I'd seen it before them, and it was circulating on X a couple of days before that. And the guy that posted it had gotten it from a hunter, apparently, and posted it. And I actually enjoyed some of the comments, man, and not in a bad way. You know what was really interesting was some people were saying, what's sad is this could be true, and everyone would say it's fake, because that's kind of the reality that we live in, and we don't really know. If it is real, that's pretty terrifying to see in the woods. I'll say that. That's a pretty terrifying figure. And he said it was like 8-9 feet tall, according to the hunter. It's pretty wild, man. I don't know. I don't really have the answer for stuff that people get on camera. I'm a big proponent of it's not all fake, but it's not all real.
It's not all fake and it's not all gay.
Yeah, that too. And, just side note, that's why I started this podcast that I started, was because honestly, when I got really tired of the community for a while, I didn't even know if I wanted a podcast because I really despised that this was supposed to be. I don't even call it a community. It's not really, but let's just for argument's sake, say it's a community. I despise the fact that it's supposed to be a community of people who are supposed to bring information, talk about what it could be, and then say, I don't really know in the end. The sad thing is this community is filled with a bunch of people who think they know it all. And that is something that I didn't want to do with the podcast. I wanted to leave things open-ended if they are. You know, I talk a lot about a lot of topics. And the one thing I say on my podcast is, I'll tell you what I think about this stuff, but in the end, I don't really know. And I think, especially when you're talking about religious texts, people can go 0 to 60 pretty quick because they're very deep rooted in a belief system, and they have a hard time when their paradigm gets jolted. And it's tough. And I can tell you, even from my own perspective, Juan, there are times where people will say things, and I can find myself getting emotional over something that I shouldn't be getting emotional about. And I've gotten a lot better because I talked to somebody recently, and they said, you know, that's just chatter in your head. Once you realize you're just having that old chatter going off in your head and you say, oh, that's just chatter, you can just leave it. I don't have to engage or get caught up in the fray. And I encourage others, and that's what I've been doing with my show, is encouraging people to research. But at the end of the day, and it's funny you said touch grass, that's how I end every one of my shows. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole. Because that's the name of the podcast, Free the Rabbits. I'm not trying to stay down in a rabbit hole. I'm trying to live life. And I think me as a Christian, but even if you're not a Christian, I think we should want to connect to our fellow man, do better on this earth. And I find it that the conspiratorial community or truther community is not the place for that. Like, people really are just as bad as the people they rail against, you know, and we won't get into those divisive subjects today, but we all know what they are. There's a bunch of them out there, and people have deep-rooted ideas about certain topics, and they will get mad if you challenge that idea without thinking that maybe that topic's been infiltrated that you believe in. I don't doubt for a minute. The first episode I did was called the Cass Sunstein Effect, and I did some deep research on Cass Sunstein and his whole idea of infiltrating the truther community back in 2008, and he worked for Obama. So his whole idea was to infiltrate, turn them up by 1,000, that way so nobody really knows what the truth is. And then you just start dumping more and more off-the-wall theories, and people get really deep-rooted on those ideas without actually thinking that, well, you know what, there might be some falsity to this. You know, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on stuff. I think there's some truth in just about everything. But what I will say is I don't buy wholeheartedly into a lot of these theories. I like to research them. I like to present them. And I think that's what we should do as podcasters. But I'm not here to tell you what to think and believe. That's not what I'm here to do. Now, as a Christian, I hope you find God, because I feel like that my life has changed for the better, and I feel like that my interconnectivity with other people has changed for the better. I don't look at people like they're less than human. And I think at some point in my life I did. I think there were some people where I looked at them with like a certain level of disdain, like they can't see what I see. And it's sad. I think that what I realized, and I had so many people connect with my show recently, because I'm showing them how to take on these heavy topics, but not get, as you like to say, lost in the sauce. And it's very true, though, Juan. Like, we get very lost in these theories that at the end of the day, they don't really matter. Now, what's really funny, you brought up the end of the world.
Before we get further in, dude, where can people go to Free the Rabbits, and what's your website and your handles so people can check out your podcast? Because it's a great show, and I think people should know more about it.
Yeah, you can catch me on any platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, any of the major streaming places. You can find me on YouTube as well. Just go to YouTube/Free the Rabbits. You can find me on Rumble as well. I do have the odd episode that will only be up on Rumble, depending on what it is. I just did an episode about EGI, and it was not for YouTube friendly at all. So I preface that it will be the odd episode that I do that. Now, it will always be on Spotify, Apple, or whatever. I just know that there are certain topics that, get flagged pretty quick, and is just as well. But I do want to talk about them because I think that it's important to talk about some of these topics that people are very deep rooted in. EGI was a very important thing for me to talk about because people get so lost in that idea that everybody in Hollywood's this way, everybody that's a celebrity this way, every athlete's this way, when, maybe there's a super small portion that is happening. And I don't think that when you connect that idea to Baphomet and the lore behind Baphomet and Eliphas Levi, when you get into Crowley and all those different characters, and I know we're getting off Dogman a little bit, but when you get into those characters, that there isn't something there. What I am trying to say is, though, it's not everything. And I think we get so caught up in like this one thing that we hold true is everything. And if it turns out that that's not true, then it shatters our whole lives because we built our whole construct of our day around that idea or that theory, and I think that it's important for people to understand that we don't have to live life like that. And I found in a very, weird way, when I started looking at people that were in the conspiratorial world, I started getting sad, and I mean that honestly, because some of these people are super lonely. They're super depressed. They don't have any friends. They don't have any family, and they feel alone. And that's sad because we, as podcasters, one, should do better to try to help those people find a way out. And I think for me, that was important with the show, was to help people find a way out of the hole. It's not bad to go in the hole and find information and dig deep. You and I do that for a living. So like we love doing this stuff, but at the same time, I can go super deep and I can literally leave it. Because at the end of the day, generally all of its theories, unless it's something that's very cut and dry provable. And I think that that's how we need to start looking at all of these topics, as not as we're trying to seek the truth so much as I'm doing research. And as I gather research, I'm learning more about the world around me. And we should start looking at these topics as, how is this going to help me in my daily life? If it doesn't, then it's a cool piece of information that I learned. I love it, but it doesn't really have anything to do with how I'm going to treat my kids today or my wife today or Jim Bob down the street. It doesn't really work that way. And I think that's what we get so lost in, because so many people get lost in these rabbit holes and they forget about real life. You can think you're living a simulation or a matrix, but you can still live life, man. Like it doesn't, however you want to think about the world, right? I think that we've got to start living instead of giving up. And that's what I saw a lot of in the community, Juan.
Well, dude, you can bring however the saying goes, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Similarly to how you can bring a knowledge to a man, you can't make him believe anything that he doesn't want to believe. And I think some people are stuck in their ways when it comes to this sort of thing, and it seems like we're being drip fed new conspiracies every other week. The latest one is the next attempt at Trump and how everyone's decoding all that bullshit, and they're just going on and on and on. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, dude, I love conspiracy theories. I think they're awesome, but they're thought experiments, right? And that's mostly why, because a lot of people that have come to know me or other content creators that hit me up, they're like, yeah, you're into conspiracies. I'm like, bro, I'll be honest, I'm more into the occult and the esoteric, because that, at least similar to how, right, the Dogman, that has some foundation in history, even if it is fake and gay and it is all bullshit. There's still some record to it. I mean, let's be real, dude. Let's be real for 1 second. Religion is all stories and information that's been written down. And how many people believe in that? right? I mean, I've felt the Holy Spirit before. I can't explain it to anyone who hasn't been there, similar to how you can't explain the first time you hold your son, your newborn son, and that love you feel at the, you know what I'm talking about?
Mhm.
You can't explain that feeling unless you experience it. You
And
know?
to piggyback on what you just said, that's a new form of thinking, or at least growth from me over the past year, where as a Christian, I realized that the best way to connect to people is not trying to force them to think anything like you think, and also opening yourself up to the idea that some of the things you were taught weren't necessarily on par. Here's a good one for you, right? So this is something I've been getting into recently, and eventually I'll do a podcast
Or
about
just
it. But
because you don't understand it doesn't make it fake and gay. Just because you can't grasp it, right?
Exactly. And one of the topics I've been getting into lately, and I'm going to do a podcast soon, but I want to do some more research on it, is postmillennialism. Like the idea that Jesus already came back in like the early, like 100 years, 200 years after, like he left the first time, and the 7 years has already happened. We're in like the short season. There are several guys that have been talking about that. I've done some research on it somewhat. And one of the guys that I'm really close with, I do films with, Ward, he's a big postmillennialism. And what I do like about it, though, Juan, is
They believe that Jesus already came.
Absolutely.
And we're in the 7,000 years or whatever it is of
we're
the
in
apocalypse.
that period of time. We're in the period of time. And not really apocalypse, but it's more or less like you've got two warring factions that are running parallel. And this is moving us towards the end of time to where eventually, like, it all is rectified and all reborn in the end, right? But the apocalypse, that stuff already happened. Like, so it's an interesting theory, and I do say theory because it's not something I can prove, but here's what I like about it. I like it because what I don't like about pre-tribulation, and I'm not saying I don't buy it as a thing, because I don't know. Again, I think a lot of these things are built on theories and theology. What I don't like about pre-trib people is this one. They are always looking for the world to end. And it is like around every single corner. I remember when I was in like third grade in the 80s, bro, I remember they were talking about the barcode being put on your head, and they were talking about
the mark of the beast.
Well, and listen, you know, everybody's pointing to Israel. I'm like, bro, Israel's been doing this since I've been a kid. Like every 5 years, something's happening. It's happening. And it's, you know, Y2K. We can go down the line of all these different instances. 2012, it's the Sumerian clock. It's happening. And some people think, oh, it did.
Mayan,
that's why we have these.
Get your facts straight,
Sorry,
Joe. Mayan clock, all right?
The Mayan clock, but it wasn't Sumerian culture that did predict 2012 as well. So it's not just
really?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sumerians have set a reset time for like every, and don't quote me on this one, I think it's 3,200 years. There's supposed to be a reset time that happens. So interestingly enough, that was supposed to be one of those particular reset times.
Wow.
Now, you know, there could be somebody in the comments say, you're wrong. So I'm a Sumerian genius. But, you know, from what I've read. So, but regardless, some people think it happened during then. Some people think that that's why we have these quote unquote Mandela effects, because it did reset. We don't know it, right? So regardless, again, it just goes back to there are a million different theories out there of what's actually going on. What I'm trying not to get caught up in is the end times and the world ending, because we don't know. Even if it's pre-trib and Jesus comes and everybody gets, you know, raptured up and there's 7 years, bro, that could be 10,000 years from now. We don't know. We could be dead and gone for a long time. You know, we've got great grandchildren by then. Like, who knows? The problem is people get so caught up in fear mongering and fear. I feel like that emotion elicits more out of humanity than anything, as opposed to like love and compassion, which is.
Just want to remind everyone, make sure to check out the show on Patreon, patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast. I constantly get emails. Oh, only one episode a week. Yeah, one episode a week for the public, but for as little as $5 a month, you can get up to 2, sometimes 3, sometimes one episode per day on the Patreon, as well as on the YouTube channel as a member for as little as $5. And there's also on the Patreon over 250 episodes only found on there. There's an extensive backlog of episodes. So check that out. If for those interested, for those asking, make sure to follow the show on YouTube, Juan Podcast. Also, Juan Media. I am going live every Tuesday on there streaming. I also go live on twitch.tv/Juan Podcast. So make sure to check me out on there Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern. And make sure to get your copy of the Occultus Mundi Homunculus Owner's Manual, all that good stuff at tjojp.com. Can pick up your copies there or go over to the Ko-Fi. I'm on Facebook, Twitch, Kick, Rumble, all that good stuff. You know where to find it. And enjoy this episode.
Mind-blowing to me. Now, I do think that does play into these negative entities, negative energies that are going on in the world. Obviously, they want to stir that pot. And social media has made it, you're talking about thought experiments, made it the ultimate thought experiment on how to do that. It's easy to make someone go 0 to 60 and comment back and forth with somebody for 2 weeks over something that they're mad about. And Christians are the worst. Bro, I go at Christians hard, and I am one. I do it on my show all the time. I'm like, listen, I can't because I am one. Because you guys are the absolute worst, railing on people about going to hell, railing on people about this and that. Well, hey, guess what?
The concept of what you're talking about, that Jesus already came, that goes completely against what I was born and raised with, the idea that Jesus is coming, right? That he hasn't been here. And I'm wait a minute, so who's right?
But let me tell you something, though. Do you know that the pre-trib idea didn't even come out until the 1800s? So like the early 1800s. Before that, people believed in postmillennialism for the most part. There were certain sects within the Catholic Church that had the idea of pre-trib, but it was never a thing until the 1800s. It's only been around for like 150 years, 175 years, Juan. So you think about it, it wasn't even a permeable thought in the church until it came about in the 1800s. So if you look at it from that aspect, like, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this post-millennial idea. I will say this, what I do like about post-millennialism, and I did say this earlier, you ain't got to worry about like the apocalypse and all that. Hey, that already happened. We're just trying to build like we're supposed to build. So I like the idea of not living in fear, man. I do like that, and I'm not going to, regardless if he comes back tomorrow, 10,000 years from now, or already has. I'm living life to live life to the fullest, man, and I'm not trying to bog myself down with this fear, and that's what I preach on my show. And I didn't mean to go off on a little rant there about how I feel about the community, but that's really what my show is based on, and I go deep, man. Like, I go deep into the esoteric, the occult, all that. And I think that's very important when you're looking at these signs and symbols going on around us. It doesn't mean that evil doesn't exist and they're not trying to manipulate or control us. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we don't need to live in fear because of that, because that's why they do it. Listen, every single celebrity that's throwing up these signs and symbols, man, I would even go as far as to say 70% of them aren't probably involved in the occult at all. They're just doing what a promoter's told them to do, doing what a videographer's telling them to do, doing what the company's telling them to do, and they're just doing it as art. They really are. They are pushing an agenda. They are pushing this symbolism to warp our minds. Absolutely. But I don't know if they're all necessarily that deeply involved. It just can't be. You can't look at, oh, they're all involved. I just think some of them are just what you would consider a useful idiot. They're just doing what they're told to do to make money. Oh, sure, I'll dress up like the devil in this music video, or I'll play this part in a movie because you're telling me to do it and I get paid millions of dollars. Sure. Whatever. I think there's a lot of people that would do that really wouldn't care what they're pushing for a lot of money and fame and power. So I don't think it's all this deep-seated occult
cabal
ritual. Right. Does that exist, though? I think so. I think there is this group of people who manipulate things behind the scenes. There's been too many secret societies that have been talked about throughout history. So I don't think that that's not a real thing. I just think we got to get some sort of balance in our lives, Juan, where it's not, we're so just constantly controlled. And sadly, I think that the conspiratorial communities may be more controlled than these normies that are railed against. And it's sad to say, because we're supposed to be the people that critically think. Mm-hmm. But man, you see something pop up online, you see how many people believe it instantly within seconds. Here's a good one for you. And I did a show on this, but I can talk about this on YouTube because it's not bad. So the whole thing about the boxer from, what was it, Armenia? I think it was Armenia. And so she was in the Olympics, right? It went 0 to 60, right?
Yeah.
So come to find out, you do the research. Amani, that's her name, Amani. So you do the research.
She was a woman.
She's a woman. Check this out. She boxed in the 2020 Olympics. Mm-hmm. She already boxed the Olympics, and she lost. She lost in like the second round. Here's the best part. The boxing organization that came out with this info on her and the other boxer from China, the guy that ran it was Russian, and he put out this disinformation on them when they were boxing in the World Olympics before the Olympics, because they were beating the crap out of these girls. So he wanted to say that first off, he came out and said that the test levels were high, which would mean that you're probably on some sort of performance enhancing drug. Then he came out later when that wasn't proven and said, oh, they had XY chromosome. They weren't really female. That came out later. Come to find out, this guy is one of the most nefarious, seedy individuals ever. He actually rigged the system to stay in as president of this boxing organization that actually got banned by the Olympic Committee. So when the Olympic Committee took these girls in, they tested them like they always do. They tested fine. And by this point, Amani's been training for years. She's a big chick. She kind of reminds me of the guy from Rocky 3. Like, if he dies, he dies. You know what I mean? It reminded me of that. I actually considered getting a shirt with her on it and just putting that underneath it and just start wearing it around, because I'm like, and she's pretty dope, man. She's a big chick, man. Just pounding these girls, man. Get bigger chicks then if she's bothering you.
Get good.
But the problem is the conspiratorial community, Fox News, all the mainstream hopped on it, and everyone believed it. Do you know it took me 5 minutes to find out what I told you?
I did the same thing, dude. I Googled it, and 2 minutes, not even a 1 minute of Google, you'll see it was fake news. But I think, dude, that even these conspiracies, or these parasitic conspiracies, they're another form of possession, dude. I mean, there is not enough evidence for somebody who is not a believer. You can hit them with whatever you want, and they're not going to believe it, dude, because some people thrive in this chaos of going against whatever the mainstream is. So whatever the mainstream is, I want to go against it because why? Because F the system. Why? Well, because. Well, that's not a reason. It's XYZ, and insert your ideological conspiracy here of whatever thing. And dude, after all these years, if there's anything that I've learned, it's that I don't know shit. And the more I learn, the less I know. And I'm not up here telling you they're all homunculus. Maybe, who knows? They could, they could. It could very well all be homunculus. So, but I'm not here shoving it down people's throats. Like, that they're all homunculus. No, they're actually XY. They're homunculus. Like getting all mad and stuff. It's like, I like to entertain different possibilities and have a conversation.
And I'm with you on that. And that's what I wanted to build the show on, was being able to look at everything objectively. And I can say that I've been a part of looking at conspiracies for a long time. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster for me on like how I presented it. And I think that I'm in a space right now where I like to present it in a certain way, where I can present it in a very objective format. Also in a way that people who walk all kind of different life and lives can take and say, you know what, I can take something from this. And I encourage people to do that, because what are we here for then, right? If we're just trying to stir the pot and get people worked up all the time, again, it's feeding into those entities, like you said. I completely agree with you on that part of it, Juan, where I feel like there is a spiritual presence that's pushing people to get trapped in these rabbit holes of negativity. And I think we're just feeding whatever these entities are by doing that. And I don't think that as people, we're supposed to live like that, one. And why are we always looking for the world to end, brother? Like, why is it not that we're actually trying to literally touch grass and connect to our fellow man, even if they think differently than us? You know, what does it matter if they think that the earth's a diamond and you think that it's a square? You know, who cares? It's not that significant, one, in the scheme of how you walk your daily life. Now, is it fun to look into those topics and say, hey, I think there's some organizations out there that probably aren't telling us the full truth. They're trying to manipulate us, probably out of our money. And
why do all the tattoos on their arms never add up to the amount of people they said it was? Yikes. I don't know. I mean, maybe history is all bullshit, right? Like, there's a lot more things we got to worry about than what shape the earth is. All right. I'm just saying some things don't add up. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying nothing happened.
100%. I'm with you on things don't add up. And that's the fun part of doing in-depth research, to say, hey, there's some stuff here that doesn't really add up. You know, I'm not a huge proponent on flat earth, but I will say that there's some stuff that doesn't add up. I don't think they got it all wrong. I think there's some things that are definitely hard to connect, but I can say that nobody's got it figured out, you know. And to say that I don't think the earth's flat, it doesn't mean that I'm buying everything that NASA's saying. And it also doesn't mean that I'm not buying some stuff that NASA's saying too.
Here's the thing, that's a telescope right there, bro. I can see stuff with it. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's stuff I can see with it, with my eyeball, right? That I can invite you over. Yo, Joe, take a look at this. And you can see it right there. What is it? Oh, well, it's, I don't buy it. It's a holographic projection. I don't buy it. It's there. Right. Oh, it's not as far as they say. Okay, it's not as far as they say, but it's there.
Right.
Doesn't matter if it's not as far as they say, but it's still something there. So until proven otherwise, I'm not going to change my opinion.
Here's a good question for people. What if what they're saying about the earth and the gravitational pulls and the galaxy is true? What if that is true? Like, I think that gives conspiratorial people a super tough time, because then that would mean that they were tricked. Now they were double tricked, because they thought they were tricked the first time, and then they got tricked again, and then they came back and like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I think that's tough for people that go down a rabbit hole of being like, I am deep rooted in this and this is it. And if you don't think like me, then you're an idiot and I won't even talk to you. And I don't think that's right, because I think that's what they want. That's that division, and they don't want us to just connect to our fellow man. And I'm not talking connect to our fellow man to fight the system. I'm just talking about connecting to our fellow man. I think that's what they don't want. Love, compassion, you know, those type of traits that we should have as humanity. But like, what if all that stuff is true? You know, generally people that believe in flat earth, a lot of them are Christians, right? And I know the verses, and frankly, you can refute them. I mean, I've heard the antithesis of it. I always joke that there's always an antithesis of everything. I think you and I've talked about it a lot, about a lot of different topics. There's always an antithesis of everything. Just because you have this way of thinking doesn't mean that there's not an objection there, and a solid objection at that. My question to Christians is, you believe in God, a God who you do not understand at all. He's something that's far greater than our minds can even wrap around, right? So you're telling me that he couldn't create something that you don't understand. You know, the joke is like, we're spinning out of control. Is it spinning out of control, or is it spinning in perfect control? That's the thing you got to think about. People don't think about these things when they want to fight the system, because it's what, to your point, I need to go against the mainstream because this is what the mainstream's telling us, and it's all lies. I don't think it's all lies. I don't think it's all truth either. I just think we need to be objective in how we look at topics, look at things, and say, here's the research I've done. I like this idea, and this is kind of where I stand right now. I've changed my thought pattern on a lot of things in the past 3 years, Juan. And just recently, I've changed my ideas on certain biblical topics. You know, I'm even exploring, like I just told you, the idea that Christ already came. So just the idea of me exploring that would ruffle certain people's feathers. Oh, this is how it is.
Because what's the point then? If he already came, then what are you here for? If it isn't it to build a relationship with him, therefore when he does come for the rapture, you go on to the next dimension, or maybe, you know, when you pass on, you go on to this other realm. Because otherwise, what's the point of rebuilding if we know it's going to end right in the great war at the very end, which is the whole thing in Revelation, you know, the 2,000 years of this, or however many years it is, whatever.
Well, the idea is that Christ, God, is coming to create a new earth. I think that's one of those verses that gets thrown out all the time with Christians. They're always concerned with getting to heaven when God created this earth for us. This earth's always going to be here. It's just going to be reborn to a point where everything's good, and it'll all go back to that period of time. And again, I think it's a combination of interdimensional too. I think you're not wrong there, but I don't think it's like, can't wait. You know, those old hymns back there, I can't wait to go to heaven and be with my loved ones, all that kind of stuff. You know, everybody's always screaming about going to heaven instead of trying to live life on this earth that we were supposed to be on in the first place. So I think if you were to buy into postmillennialism, that's how you're living. You're living to build for your family. You know what? Sadly, I've even had family members that are pre-trib people, and they've given up. They're not even building for their families anymore. They're not even building for the future anymore. They're like, why are you going to? The world's about to end in 2030. You know, how many times have we heard, you know, the goalpost to be moved, what, in 2030, then it moves to, what, 2045?
Our calculations were a little off, but I promise you that in November of 2024, the next, I think the latest one is 2040, but it's far enough to where these dudes will probably be kicking rocks by the time that comes around. And then when 2040 comes around, oh, we were off once again. Come on, dude. It's like, enjoy. I've always joked around where it's like Christians are more focused on the afterlife, that they're not focusing on living their life today.
And that was
They walk around like they have a stick shoved so far up their asses that it's annoying, right? Like it's annoying. That's the reason why I left church, man.
And I get it. And I didn't go to church for almost 20 years, man. I just fortunately found something within the last year and a half that works for me. And I love the guy that runs it, and he's very open and honest, and he's very open about his flaws. And I think that's what somebody in that position should be, because it lets people know that he's just like you. And I think for me, that works for me. And I'm not saying that you got to go to church to be with God either. Like, it doesn't work like that either. But to your point about learning how to live life on this earth, you know, I started reading the Bible front to back again. I want to go through it, doing like a 90-day program where I'm running through every day. And interestingly enough, every single character in the Bible is not living to get to some other place. They're living life to build on this earth. You look at all the ancient patriarchs like Abraham and David and Solomon and all of these great characters. They were building on this earth. It was never about the afterlife. I mean, that was there, but it wasn't where they were, you know, essentially trying to go. And matter of fact, there were many times where God came down here and had conversations with them about what they should build here, which is even crazier. I mean, why did Jesus even come here? To teach us how to build here. So I just think that a lot of Christians have it twisted, man. They don't look at how they can help their fellow man. And I think that's what deters a lot of people from Christianity. And I'm not saying religion, because I'm not a religious guy. I don't like religion as a whole, and I think it's a very controlled construct. But I do think that in the form of Christianity, what Christ is teaching, I think that, listen, man, even if you're not a Christian, you should look at his teachings. There's nothing wrong with his teachings. We should be living that way, living to connect to our fellow man, better the world around us, connect to our neighbor. None of those things are bad things. So I think that, yes, we need to live life to build one, not
very Masonic of you, dude. Right.
Well, and the funny thing is, you go to like the Freemasonic tenets, as far as building goes, I almost think that was the inversion of what God put us on this earth to do in the first place. It started with Cain and the Brotherhood of the Snake, and how he built the first city of Enoch with his son Enoch, and not the Enoch that we know that was seventh line from Seth, but this other Enoch. So yeah, I think Freemasonic tenets are all built on this building process of these geometric lines that will help you transcend your mind and transcend your consciousness. And I think they're always trying to emulate what God already did. And I don't think it'll ever achieve that level of...
And you know what's interesting, right? Because they talk about Jesus being a carpenter. I've heard people say he was a mason, like masonry. And studying for the construction stuff, there's a lot of 33s, and even in sports, I recently went to this. I forget what the hell it's called, but my neighbor wants to open up this basketball program. I'm trying to remember the name. Anyways, it's like an interactive wall, right? It's got where it trains you, right? And they have all these videos and tutorials, and it's really interactive where you take the ball, you hit the wall, and it's like a screen. You have to squash the bugs for the kids, or it'll show you a drill, and then you do the drill and shoot the ball, whatever it is. And in one of the sections, because we went to go see one that's already open over on the East Coast, and it was like it hadn't opened to the public yet, but we knew the owner, or my neighbor knew the owner, so we went, and they let us try out all the equipment. And there was a section that would let you shoot the basketball, and it would read your angle, your like all the angles. Like it would read everything, like your attack angle and the arc and all that stuff. And the perfect shot in a basketball, I forgot which measurement it was 33 degrees. And it was funny because the logos that the company used, because it's a franchise, in putting up, all the logos and it's just the visual stuff, they had compasses, bro. They had the compass. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And then once you start looking at they were teaching us about the program and everything it reads, it's like, oh, once you're consistent between, it was like X and 33 degrees, you're going to hit the correct shot every single time. And I'm just like thinking to myself, it's all Freemasonic, baseball is, but even that's a conspiracy, bro. It's like, you can't get it out of your head. I'm here playing basketball, trying to enjoy my day. It's like, damn, 33 degrees here. I'm reading the Florida building codes, 33 feet. God, Lee here. They're all infiltrated.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of that too, for sure. And there's also that inversion tactic, and I'd like to bring that up as well, like what I just said. I think that the Freemasonic tenets are just an inversion of what God originally created. We talk about alchemy, so I don't think that Adam and Noah and all these ancient patriarchs were blinded to this interconnectivity to God, maybe a little more than we have now, where what they would do would be considered magic now. And maybe this ancient alchemy that some of these guys taught, that was an inversion of that. So I think you've got kind of two warring factions. I always joke about the Roman Catholic Church, the early Roman Catholic Church that infiltrated Christianity and bogarted it into what it is now, where you've got to have these tenets to get to God. I don't think the Gnostics were any less diabolical. And I know that would be, blasphemy to say to people who are in the conspiratorial world because they love the Gnostics. But I mean, Gnosticism in and of itself had a lot of ridiculousness. Recently I was reading through the book of Judah, which is really crazy.
Gospel of Judah?
Yeah, the Gospel of Judah. And what's really crazy about that book is nobody knows who wrote it. It showed up about 350 AD ish. And then, they try to sell it off as it was a biography of Judah, but nobody knows who wrote it. And a lot of these Gnostic texts that people say should be in the Bible were written so much later that really had nothing to do with that same time period or even close to even the New Testament stuff. So, and again, I'm not here to argue it should be in the Bible or not. I'm just saying that I don't think the Gnostics were any better. I always say that the truth's more in the middle, and I think you had these two warring factions. I just think that the Roman Catholic Church was more powerful and wiped out this other faction because they felt like that this faction was infringing on their thought pattern that they wanted to control. It didn't necessarily mean that this thought pattern was correct because they were getting wiped out. Because here's the other side of it. I would go to argue as much as to say the Gnostics are the precursors to the Aleister Crowleys, to the Jack Parsons. And if you think about it, Crowley studied the Gnostic text more than anything. I mean, he performed the Gnostic Mass. They were all about Gnosticism. So if you've got a guy who's considered at one point the evilest man on the earth who buys this ideology, I have to question it a little bit. I can't just say that these Gnostics had it right. So again, I'm not saying that the Roman Catholic Church is right either. I think that Christ gave us a plan that we can connect directly to him. We don't need anybody else. I think the Gnostics took it a step further, like alchemists do, like, I'm going to transcend, I will be a god. And that's where they got out of pocket, in my opinion. Whereas the other side was like, no, you can't get the god, but we got these things you have to do, and then we'll talk to him for you. So I think you had two sides that were like, it's kind of like if you look at politics now, you have the extreme right, extreme left. Most people are probably more so in the middle that you don't hear from, but you see the extreme right, the extreme left on social media, and it makes you think that that's all that's going on in this political realm when it's actually not. It's just what's being pushed in the forefront of your mind. And I think the same thing was happening back then with these Gnostics and the Roman Catholic Church. Just my opinion, though.
So you think like Bigfoot might be like a liberal, and then Dogman is more of a conservative, far right leaning?
I like it.
Because it seems like, right, we're talking about fear boners. That's what I call it, just fear boners. People just want the worst to happen, the worst thing, right? They're just, I'm not saying people manifest it, because I think manifestation isn't what we've been told as far as like, oh, you think of it and it happens. But I do kind of sort of think that once you think about something, you start resonating it out. It might have some influence. I'm still up in the air about that, because I've experienced some weird shit before. And it's like, well, I'm kind of sort of open to these sort of things. And do you attract them by being more open to them? Is that part of the psychological warfare? Is that part of the spiritual warfare? Because again, it's not a war between flesh and blood. It's a spiritual war. So by you therefore opening your mind to these parasitic conspiracies, do you bring forth the synchronicity? Are synchronicities demonic? Are synchronicities demonic? And hey, Carl Jung said you can take it for what it is, or you can, make it have a deeper meaning and a deeper significance. It's all up to you. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And it's like, well, yeah, I experience all these synchronicities. Well, shit, they might be demons in disguise, right? Like, who knows? Because we don't really know how things operate, right? I mean, I think that's one of the fundamental questions. What is reality? I think even Adam and Eve at one point in time were questioning, what is this reality? And what is this entity telling us, hey, build here or exist here, and you can eat from all these trees except for one. For one tree of what? The knowledge of good and evil. And it's like, and in the Gnostic cosmology, they go, well, he didn't want you to know because he was actually Satan and he created reality. It's like, oh shit. And then you start going that whole rabbit hole. Been there, done that. And I think that was the shock to my system when I first started, dude, the Gnosticism. And it was like, wait a minute. Everything I learned, the opposite exists. So where do I stand?
Yeah.
And I think that just makes, I think I've been so deep in it because I want to prove either myself right or wrong, but I don't think the answer exists, bro. I don't think it's out there.
Personal opinion, I think the answer exists, but I also think you have to have that personal experience with God to have that happen. And if you don't, then it's going to be a constant question in your mind. Now, that's not to say that I don't question things that come out of the church or question what people have expounded about the Bible, right? You were talking about Gnosticism and, you know, the big Yahweh was actually an evil God. And
he was a dragon. He was a dragon.
But, you know, it's funny about a lot of those Gnostic ideas, they came far, far after the Torah was ever written. I mean, it was just, extremely far down the line. So it's like what the Gnostics just figured it out a few thousand years later, like, oh, this is what it is. Like, you know, and you could argue there's stuff from before, but generally speaking, the Gnostics got pretty hot after, you know, Jesus left. And I do think that Gnosticism was the antithesis of the Roman Catholic Church, but not necessarily a good antithesis. I don't think that the paradigm of good evil, when just to the human mind, isn't necessarily what's the truth. It's just what they're purveying as this good versus evil, as opposed to actually us seeking out the truth. And that's why I've been going through the text and reading the Hebrew and trying to understand, you know, what we were put on this earth to do in the first place. And one of the things I really realized is I'm here to love people and build on this earth. And when I realized that helped me with everything else, the podcast, anything else I'm doing, because now I'm living free, Juan. I'm not living in fear. I'm not living like somebody's over my shoulder 24/7. And again, it's not to say that we don't see the evil and move away from it or protect other people. And yes, I talk about things on my podcast and on your podcast now and how I feel about stuff, but I don't have it all figured out. It's even when it comes to God, man, far from it. Like, I don't even try to tell people that, you know what I mean? I just know that I'm not going to jump on Gnosticism as like the end all be all just because it's against what the mainstream church ideology is pushing, because that just seems like a very occult thing to do. Oh, no. Come here and get the power that they won't give you. We got the power here. Well, what's to say that's not a negative entity that's purveying that to you, offering up this power? Dude, there's too many people involved in the dark aspects of the occult that love the Gnostics. That's just a big red flag for me. I can't not look at that and say that there's not something there. And I'm not saying that I just throw everything away that the Gnostics say either. I try to read through as much as possible and come up with what I feel comfortable with. And again, I don't think we're ever going to have it figured out. And you're completely right, Juan. We're never going to have it figured out.
I'm still here. I'm just swapping out my my freaking capture card.
Oh,
but let's get back to the Dogmen, bro.
You know what I really think it is? Like, we haven't done a podcast together in
a while.
ages. And so it's just like we're getting everything off our chest. This is all that it is. So if anybody's listening, that we promise I'm about to reel it into Dogman now. So I do want to talk about how that these Dogmen, or at least these hybrids, have shown up in extra canonical texts that I think are important for us to look at those and say, especially for people that read the Bible, like, well, it's not in the Bible. Well, I could argue that there are hybrids in the Bible outside of the Nephilim. And we do know of the lion-like men of Moab, and we do know about some of these weird chimeric-looking beings that show up throughout the Bible. But I will say that one of the big extra canonical texts that I do like a lot is the book of Jasher. And they go pretty deep in a couple places about these weird hybrids that show up, and I can connect those to these Cynocephali.
Do you think that a lot of these times that they're describing these other peoples, do you think maybe it was a sort of, how do I say this? Could it have, right? You said that there were people who traded with them in India, right? The dog-headed men. Do you think maybe they were just being racist towards the other people, and they're like, yeah, they look like dogs. You can say anything about any sort of race that they resemble certain animals, right? Without getting too racist, but you get what I'm saying. And like, what if that was like another way of like, here, the whatever, you know, the banana people because they're super yellow for whatever, like whatever, you know, just use your imagination, and then that kind of sort of stuck. Do you think maybe there's some loss in translation?
When I looked into this dog-headed man phenomena, I actually put that at the forefront of my mind when I was doing the research as a possibility, especially when you're looking at guys like Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus and European. What they did.
Yeah.
I've got a crazy argument, though, that Christopher Columbus himself was a Moor. So that's a crazy rabbit hole. And eventually I'm going to do an episode on that. And those type of episodes just shake everyone up because it doesn't fit what they are trying to push historically now. But we do know that everybody on his boat that worked for him were Moors. And there are some paintings, some old paintings, and I'll actually send it to you when we're off air, but I've got a painting of Christopher Columbo, who's Christopher Columbus, and he's dark-skinned. So it's very
That wasn't even his name, though, dude. It was like something completely different.
Right. But this particular painting was of him, and it doesn't look like what they're pushing out now. So it's very interesting. I'm not saying that I'm buying in it completely, but it's just one of those research items that I look into because I do like to talk about ancient man and the Moors, you know, being here in America for a long time before people said they were, along with a lot of other races and beings here in North America. You know, even the Egyptians. I'm about to do an episode about the American Egyptians and how the Egyptians had, I mean, we're talking full on cities here in North America very early on. So, you know, it's interesting stuff. I mean, we won't talk about that today, but to your Cynocephali question, yes, absolutely. I think that there are people who write things who dehumanize other people and basically call them animals and dogs. I do not question that without a fact. I went into this research thinking that. So let me decipher this. The problem is, as I'm going through it, it's too descriptive. Way too descriptive to say that it's just a dehumanization tactic. Even I would say with Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus, they were too descriptive of just wiping out regular humans and talking about them being regular humans. Why would this odd one time them say, oh, these weird looking people came up to us and we fought them? If they were in that mind state, I think they would do it every time because they fought a lot of indigenous people and wiped out a lot of indigenous people. So why would they just do it this one time, but then all the other times not do it? I think you got to question that. But I would say with some of these Greek philosophers that interacted with these beings, they're way too descriptive and they're not trying to wipe them out. They're like hanging out with them and talking about how they operate and how they speak. And they don't speak like humans. They speak like dogs and they look like dogs. They're very descriptive. And we'll get into Teius and some of these other philosophers here in a little bit and how they spoke about them. But the book of Jasher describes these creatures as being creatures. Like, interestingly enough, like in the Bible and some of these extra canonical texts, when they talk about humans, they're human. But when they're talking about giants or they're talking about some sort of hybridized version of something, they're pretty descriptive in letting you know that they're not of the same DNA makeup. And I think you'll see this in the book of Jasher when I go through this here and how that's possible. Now, I will say for the people that are big sticklers on the canonical Bible, the book of Jasher is spoken about twice in the canonical Bible. As a matter of fact, Joshua 10:13. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance upon its enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. So we've got one instance of the book of Jasher that is referenced, 2 Samuel 1:18, and he ordered that the sons of Judah be taught the song of the bow. It is written in the book of Jasher. So again, we have the book of Jasher spoken about in the canonical Bible. So it must have some sort of significance to it if the canonical Bible is even talking about the book of Jasher, which, you know, the canonical Bible talks about some other books too, book of Enoch. There's several other books that it will talk about. And you got to look at those books as maybe being a little bit more important in the apocryphal text than some of the other ones. And I do take the book of Jasher as having a little bit more significance than some of these other ones. Now, we're going to get into these stories in the book of Jasher, and to set up the story, we're going to talk about the descendants of Edom mixing with the creatures of Mount Seir, and they basically spawned these human-animal hybrids. And Jasher's retelling is pretty clear that Mount Seir is where that these half-animal, half-men dwelt. So Esau, we know the story of Jacob and Esau, and I think I've talked about Esau before on this show and having this Bigfoot significance to it. And honestly, since that episode, I've done more research on the fact that there is a major tie-in with him creating these Edomites, which they say that from the Edomites is where at least a portion of these Bigfoot could have came from. And this is kind of how. So Esau's descendants, they were cave dwellers, and he was a great hunter, and they wanted to conquer these mountains and the land around it. But it was occupied by these creatures. Now, initially, Esau conquered the beasts, but then later mixed with them sexually, causing an offspring of these hybrids. And that laid the groundwork for the pantheon of deities found in Greco-Roman culture. So if you think about a lot of these Greco-Roman gods and goddesses all had these kind of like, not all of them, but some of them had these hybridized features. And you'll see that throughout a lot of different cultures and religions. So some people think that this spawned from this intermingling of Esau when he went there. Now, we're going to get into the actual verses here. So the stories about this guy named Anah, A-N-A-H. Now, he was one of the sons of Seir the Horite. Now, the ancestry of Seir the Horite isn't specified. He actually lived around the time of Terah, father of Abraham. Now, it's said he's the descendant of Hor, who lived around the time of Reu and was the descendant of Hivi, son of Canaan, son of Ham. So that goes into that cursed bloodline of Canaan. And you know the story of Noah and Ham, and because of that incident, that Canaan, his son, was cursed. So people think that this seed of Satan permeates through this Canaan bloodline, and this is where a lot of these hybrids are said to come from. So this ties us back into this ancestry of Seir the Horite. So we've got this Seir mountain, this mountain Seir, where Seir originally was at. Now, again, to his son Anah, and I'm going to start with verse 28.
The Horites.
Yeah, the Horites, yeah. So we're going to start with the book of Jasher, chapter 36, and we will start with 28. And the sons of Shabal were Alvin, Manasseh, Ebal, Shepho, Onam, and the sons of Zibeon were Ajah and Anah. This was that Anah who found the Yemim, which Yemim is a Hebrew word that we don't know what it means. So it's one of those weird Hebrew words where you're either saying it's probably a piece of technology or some sort of hybrid. So he finds these Yemim in the wilderness when he fed the asses of Zibeon, his father. And whilst he was feeding his father's asses, he led them to the wilderness at different times to feed them. And there was a day that he brought them to one of the deserts on the seashore opposite the wilderness of the people. And whilst he was feeding them, behold, a very heavy storm came from the other side of the sea and rested upon the asses that were feeding there. And they all stood still. And afterward, about 120 great and terrible animals came out from the wilderness at the other side of the sea. They all came to the place where the asses were, and they placed themselves there. Those animals from the middle downward were in the shape of the children of men. And from their middle upward, some had the likeness of bears, and some the likeness of the kephas. Now, this is another Hebrew word that we do not have an answer for. Now, it does resemble a Hebrew word, kophi, which is the Hebrew word for ape. So this could play into that idea that these were Bigfoot type creatures that were coming out of these woods. Now, their lower half is that of a man, but the upper half, you've got these bear-like men. You've got
That's the book of Jasher, bro. I have
Jasher.
it, and I've never cracked it open, to be honest.
It's very interesting. And so and some the likeness of the Kephas, with tails behind them from between their shoulders reaching down to the earth like the tails of the Duchipath. So the Duchipath are a whole nother hybrid. So they're equating these Kephas to these Duchipath, which again is another Hebrew word that we do not have the answer for at all. And these animals came and mounted and rode upon the asses and led them away. And they went away into this day. And one of the animals approached Anna and smote him with his tail and then fled from that place. And when he saw his work, was exceedingly afraid of his life, and he fled and escaped the city. And he basically goes back to his sons and brothers and tells them what happened. And they're all scared of this incident, and they don't really want to go back to that area. That's to kind of cut that down. But here's Anna. He's going out there to feed his asses, feed his donkeys. And these creatures come pouring out of these mountains of Mount Seir, and clearly they have some sort of intelligence. They're riding them off, and they attack him with their tails. Now, I did some research on these Kephas and these Duchipath to see if there was anything else that could connect to them, and I am going to pull up the share screen for this one. Let's see.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that book was packed with so much juice, you know.
Oh yeah, it's a great book because there's so much about giants and hybrids in there too. Actually, more about giants and hybrids in there, which I find absolutely fascinating when we're digging into a lot of this stuff. Let me pull up this share screen. All right, I'm going to share it there with you.
There you go.
I'm going to show you what they call a stela. So you got these stellas here that are found in like the Middle East. You're going to see them in this area of India, Middle East. You're going to see them in Greece. Like,
did you open up a picture wide? Because I'm only seeing the files.
Oh, you're only seeing the files? That's really weird. Let me try to switch over.
Did you share the wrong? Maybe you
probably
just shared
did.
the folder. But yeah, you're pointing at it, and we can only see the files.
All right, let's stop that. I'll do it again. There we go. So these are what these stellas look like right here. They're basically grave markers, but they're only in a specific part of the world. So you've got these stellas that have permeated different cultures, but from a specific area. However, I'm going to pull this up. This was a weird one that was found in Bogota,
Colombia?
Yeah, let me show you this real quick. This is pretty wild.
A long ways away.
It is actually a long ways away. Let's see here.
Yeah, Colombia is...
Actually, El Bal, Guatemala is where it's at. So it's in Guatemala.
Okay.
But still a long way away. And I'm going to share the screen here. All right. So you got this odd-looking creature that shows up, and it's in the form of a stela, which is completely different in the region it should be found in. So when these archaeologists found it, like, what is this? So people started matching up the description to that of the book of Jasher. So you've got this bear head right here, and you've got this
Can you zoom in on that? Can you make it bigger?
Yeah, I should be able to make it bigger.
There you go.
So you got the bear head, and you've got basically, the upper body of this bear-looking thing, and you've got these man-like legs. You got something getting beat up here. I don't know what that is down at the bottom. He's
wearing a boxing glove too.
It does look like he's wearing a boxing glove. And the weird thing is about the head, it kind of looks like there's some sort of tubing going on there, and there's a tubing along the side. So, the ancient astronaut theorists assume that this is some sort of technology, and they tied it into these Kephas or these Duchipath and said that, hey, maybe this is what they were talking about in this region of the world, and maybe their tails were some sort of technology. Maybe they came out of the mountains with some sort of technology. Now, I don't know about that one. Again, these are just theories. We're theorizing about what these Kephas and these Duchipath are, but maybe it was a combination. Maybe they got tails and technology, man. If we're talking about something that's a derivative of the Nephilim, like
Stargate, yeah.
Right. You know, we got to leave our minds open to possibilities. I always say this about the Nephilim. If you even open your mind up to the idea that Nephilim are real, you got to just open the floodgates then. You got to say, like, well, maybe all this is a possibility.
Got to open up those cheeks far and wide because they're coming in.
So that was the first instance of hybrids talked about in the book of Jasher. Now, there's another instance where these hybrids are also talked about in Jasher 61. Now, Zepho was the son of Eliphaz, the son of Esau, captain of the host to Angeas, king of Dinhabah, and was still daily enticing Angeas to prepare for battle to fight with the sons of Jacob in Egypt. And Angeas was unwilling to do this thing, for his servants had related to him all the might of the sons of Jacob, what they had done unto them in their battle with the children of Esau. So Zepho, who is the grandson of Esau, is about to go to battle, or
Esau's
from the battle.
Is that from the bloodline of Noah? Is that the hairy son and that saw
Absolutely.
him?
Right. So Isaac's sons had Jacob and Esau. Jacob stole Esau's birthright by tricking Isaac, by putting on goat hair on his hands and his neck, because Isaac was old and he was blind. What a bizarre story. It is a bizarre story, and there's so many layers to that story too. But he basically sells his birthright to Jacob early on for a bowl of red lentil stew, but then he gets Isaac's blessing, which basically gives him all the lands of his father and everything else, which is unheard of because the oldest son always gets the birthright and gets the land, which Esau was the oldest, but Jacob is the youngest, but he, along with his mother, tricked his father to get the birthright, get the blessing, because she had a dream when both sons were inside of her, they were fighting. So she had a interaction in a vision and said that the younger would rule the older. So she tried to help facilitate that by helping Jacob take everything from his brother, which caused strife forever. And this is part of that strife. You got the grandsons and the great-grandsons fighting each other. So this is what is going on with Zepho right now. He's preparing to fight the sons of Jacob. So in verse 14, and it was one day that Zepho lost the young heifer, and he went to seek it, and he heard it lowing round about the mountain. And Zepho went, and he saw, and behold, there was a large cave at the bottom of the mountain. There was a great stone there at the entrance of the cave, and Zepho split the stone, and he came into the cave, and he looked, and behold, a large animal was devouring the ox. From the middle upward, it resembled a man, and from the middle downward, it resembled an animal. And Zepho rose up against the animal and slew it with his swords. And the inhabitants of Chittim heard of this thing, and they rejoiced exceedingly and said, what shall we do unto this man who has slain this animal that has devoured our cattle? So they basically poured out rewards and anything else that these inhabitants of Chittim could do to Zepho, because apparently this half-man, half-animal creature was attacking all of their cattle and eating it. So he just happened to be saving one of his cows and ran up on it and killed it, something they couldn't do. So this is interestingly enough, because this is a little bit different than what we heard earlier in Jasher, where you had the lower half of a man, the upper half of an animal. This is the upper half of a man and the lower half of an animal. So that
I personally would want to have the lower half of the animal, probably a donkey or something, to be, have the blessings of the like a centaur, you know what I'm saying?
Right. So, centaurs, fawns, those are other.
But it's interesting that they were arguing about the same thing back then, bro. Like, did you see the Dogman? Yeah, I did see it, bro. And it's like, at least I slayed it. Well, where'd you put it? I left it there. Let's go back. And I don't know, is it gone? I mean, do they talk about what they do after?
They don't talk about it, but apparently the inhabitants of Chittim knew that he did, because he must have showcased it somehow, because they showered him with blessings, because this thing was apparently attacking all of their cattle and killing their cattle. So by him killing it, it stopped that process. So he killed something. We don't know exactly what it was, but according to the book of Jasher, I mean, these are pretty cut and dry hybrids. They're not saying that they have features of something. They're like pretty cut and dry, that this upper half's this and this lower half's this. So at least we could look at that and say, okay, here are these hybrids that are talked about in these extra canonical texts. And we could argue that the Duchipath may have been some sort of form of Dogman, because we're talking about these long tails. They use them as whips, and the upper half is that of an animal. We don't know what the Kephas of the Duchipath really were. We know that there was another one that was a lower, from the lower half up, was bear-like. So there's really 3 different hybrids that are talked about. 4 if we're talking about what we just talked about, with the lower half being an animal and the upper half being a man in the book of Jasher. And that's not to say that the book of Jasher doesn't talk extensively about the different giant tribes that were going on all throughout the Bible.
I might have to check that out, dude.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal book. It's one of the, that, in my opinion, it's up there with the book of Enoch when you're talking about extra canonical text. And it's also referenced in the canonical Bible. So it's got some sort of significance and connective tissue with the canonical Bible. So I know we're going to switch gears a little bit here. We're moving into these historians that have talked about these race of dogmen, these Cynocephalists. Now, there is a great historian, Pliny. They called him Pliny the Elder. And he was a Roman author, naturalist, natural philosopher, and naval and army commander of the early Roman Empire. So this guy's not someone who's not revered, right? He's known, his station is very well known, and he was a high-ranking military official as well. So I say all that to say this. If we're looking at these stories these historians are putting out, or writing in very detailed stories about these dogmen or these other hybridized beings they're running across, I mean, were they all for 3,000 years just making up these stories to trick people later on in life? I mean, if we want to take that and say that they were, okay, maybe they were. Maybe someone else wrote them later and said it was Pliny the Great that wrote this. I don't think so, though, because all of the historians now and people who study mythology now say that it was just, like you said, it's just some people they ran across, and they had darker skinned interpretation. But the problem is they're specifically saying what they look like. And he located these race of dogmen, the Canari, in Western Africa. Yeah, it's really interesting where he located them at, and it was in the Canary or Canine Islands, and it was off the west coast of Africa, and they were identified as the location of both the Garden of Hesperides, which some people think was the Garden of Eden, and a land of the blessed dead from at least the 1st century BC down to the Middle Ages. And if you want to tie in Hesperides, they were the daughters of the evening, or of the evening star, and it was into this red land of sunset and death that Hercules descended in order to win the apples of immortality. So here we go. We've got more hybrids showing up, and people that want to dig into Hercules. I mean, Hercules was, from all indications, some sort of demigod or Nephilim as well. So you've got this particular area of the Canary Islands, Canine Islands, where these dog-headed men were seen by Pliny the Elder. Very interesting story. And again, very reputable man. And here's a guy who's a naval and army commander. This guy is led people into battle in war. And he's also super intelligent because he's a philosopher and he's a writer as well. So maybe we say he went there and saw some people that didn't look like him, and he said they were dogmen. There's just a lot of lore coming out of that area, though.
Or there was a lot of dogs on the island that were kind of big, you know, and they're like, oh, they're dog men. I don't know. It's interesting because there is a place called Dog Island, Gambia, which is, where's this at? Yes, it's off the west coast of Africa. And Yeah, Dog Island, dude. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, and the more we dig into these philosophers, I mean, this is one of the craziest stories, and this is super detailed one. You got the Greek physician Teius, and he was around 400 BC, and he wrote full passages about the tribes of the Cynocephals. He said they speak no language but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs, their nails like those of these animals, but longer and rounder. They inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indus. They were reported to live primarily in India and northern Africa, but were seen in many places between. Their complexion is swarthy, so some people would argue like, oh, they're just dark-skinned people. This is what he's talking about. But he gets more detailed. They are extremely just, like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate. They understand the Indian language, but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and fingers by way of reply. They live on raw meat. They number about 120,000. So he goes to these mountains, meets these Cynocephali in the mountains, and there's like 120,000 of them. Matter of fact, they barter and trade with the Indians that were there. And you'll hear this throughout Indian culture, too, that they knew about these dog-headed men that lived in the mountains, and they were great warriors, but they were kind, just, and gentle. So here's the part where I don't necessarily think he's dehumanizing them, because he's talking about
the indigenous,
he's talking about how that they react to people in general who look different than them. They're just, they're kind. He lived with them. He actually talks about how that they hunted. The Cynocephali living on the mountains do not practice any trade but live by hunting. When they have killed an animal, they roast it in the sun. They also rear numbers of sheep, goats, and asses, drinking the milk of the sheep where they made it from. He says that they exchange with the Indians bread, flour, cotton stuffs, and they buy swords for hunting wild beasts, bows, arrows, and they're very adept with those things. As a matter of fact, every 5 years, the king sent them presents of 300,000 bows, 120,000 shields, and 50 swords. And they do not live in houses, but in caves. So this plays into what we talk about, the dogmen coming in and out of cave systems. So maybe this is something that's very common for dog-headed men tribes, or these Cynocephals. And I will say this is a caveat to that, because people will ask, well, why don't we see them running around all the time now? Well, if you remember, the stronger the Roman Catholic Church got, and even religions in general got, Islam, all of these different major religions, what did they do when they went to cities? They exterminated the quote-unquote demons from the place. They would go into the mountains and hunt trolls. They would go into the mountains and hunt these hybrids. You will see this in stained glass depictions, which is crazy. You're seeing all these hybrids, these trolls, and these dog-headed men on all these Roman Catholic stained glass images, and they talk about it. They considered them demonic, because back to what you said earlier, it's something we don't understand, so it's automatically demonic, and we're going to wipe it out. So if your numbers are greater than something else, no matter how strong they are, you're probably going to wipe them out. I don't think necessarily they're all wiped out. I just think that we just went underground. Like if we think that there are massive cave systems underground, I'm not even talking about Hollow Earth. I'm just talking about, we know for a fact that the Mammoth Caves exist. We don't even know how big they actually are. Some people think they cover over half the U.S. So if we think that these mammoth cave systems are interconnected globally, just say there's massive cave systems, there could be all kind of things in these cave systems that we don't know. It's very similar to the ocean. We don't know what all's in the ocean. We know very little. So if these things are already living in cave systems or close to cave systems, they would just retreat and go underground where people wouldn't go. So that would be where these things would have gone over the centuries that they were trying to be exterminated. And I think this is very similar to what probably happened. If we think that the Cynocephals are real, it's probably what happened. Now, he even talks about how they look. Both men and women have tails above their hips like dogs, but longer and more hairy. So that right there will tell you that he's not attributing a animal-like trait to a human and saying that, oh, they look this way. He says they have tails like dogs and they're hairy. So he's attributing them to look like actual dogs. And I don't know too many people that have tails. So I do think that this particular story, he is specifying them to look like actual dogs. And he also said that their teeth, I told you earlier, their teeth were larger than dogs, their nails were long, and he said that the way that they barked between each other was a language that only they understood, but yet they understood the Indian language, but they didn't speak it. So they would get the information, they understood it, but they didn't speak it. So that's how they were able to barter and trade. And like I said, Teius actually went and stayed with them for a while. He went there, ate their food. They were kind enough to him to let him stay there. So clearly they're not some sort of monstrosities that people make out these hybrids to be. And I would go as far as to say this too. What I really kind of dislike when it comes to cryptids or hybrids or whatever is that we try to pinpoint them as to being like one specific thing. And I know some people are like, they're all Nephilim and they're evil. And some people are like, no, they're flesh and blood. They've been here for billions of years. And some people are like, oh, they're metaphysical. They're just this.
Yeah.
They could be all these things. You could be running up on something that's completely different than somebody else ran up on, and it's not the same thing, but maybe they have similar features, right? Say if you ran across something metaphysical that manifested a certain way, it might resemble something that someone else ran across that's physical, but they're not the same thing. And that's why I say these dog-headed men, these Cynocephalists, I think are a specific thing. I think they would be more akin to maybe the flesh and blood dogmen that people run across in the woods, something that's actually flesh and blood. But again, from all indications, they're great warriors, but they're not overtly violent. They're not running around trying to kill people. From a lot of the stories that I've read, they're very welcoming. And I'm going to get into in a minute, there were people in the church that were arguing amongst each other that they could be redeemed. They could have salvation just like anyone else could have. So that was another interesting topic as I'm digging through this. So like, why are these people arguing this fact if there isn't something to it? And I think there possibly is. And I'll get into a little bit about that. And I know you've heard some of these stories. St. Christopher is a big story that people know about. We know of the stained glass depictions of St. Christopher. He's got a dog head on the man of a body.
The giant.
Who was described in several texts as having the body of a man, but the head of a dog. Not only that, but originally the future saint was said to have been a wild and fierce warrior who was captured in the battle in Cyrenaica. The future saint was not only a creature who was a very large man with a dog head, but came from a warrior tribe of dog-headed men who looked similar to him. So these guys were warriors. According to Christian mythology, he eventually met Jesus and learned the error of his former ways. He repented and became baptized and eventually received sainthood. And in some depictions or some versions of the story, he was given the gift of human appearance. So some people think it was a version of lycanthropy. However, there are other versions that say that, no, he was just a dog-headed man that was redeemed. I think that if he actually was a Cynocephalus, I think the church might try to spin the fact that he was turned into a human to justify maybe them going and wiping out some of these tribes of dog-headed men if they wanted to do so, and say, oh, no, but see, he was redeemed and he became a man, because that's like the real form. That's why we're killing these people. So it's a very interesting story about St. Christopher, and it is weird. You see all these depictions of him popping up. He's got a dog head. He's revered as a saint in the church, but yet it's
a dog-headed saint. Yeah, what up?
But yet it's very squelched out in mainstream Christianity. They don't want to talk about it. The Roman Catholic Church doesn't want to talk about why he looks this way. If they do bring it up, like, oh, that's just mythology. It's just part of the story.
Don't read the Old Testament. Don't read the Book of Jasher. Don't read any of that apocryphal or non-canonical extracurricular stuff, because it's the work of demons. You know?
Exactly. And I think that we can't deny these texts. Even if you think that the canonical Bible is the word of God that God wanted to oversee and put together, you can't say that these other texts don't hold significance. I would even say that the Gospel of Judah doesn't hold some significance. It at least gives me an idea of at least how the Gnostics think about things, if anything. If not, there is some, some historical significance throughout it. And I just say that with any type of text, man. Recently, I had a guy who saw this book behind me. It says the Kabbalah on it, and kind of flipped out and said, "Why are you a Christian? You have this book called the Kabbalah behind you, and you shouldn't be reading that." And I'm like, well, actually, I think as researchers and as Christians, I think we should be reading all of these texts. Now, granted, I think we should have a level of discernment when we do, and it can be easy. If you don't have your fortitude up, you could be swayed by reading some of these texts in a way that may be negative. I don't discount that, but it doesn't mean as a researcher that I shouldn't read other lines of thinking, because that gives me the weapons I need to go into battle. I always say that one of the Christians' biggest faults is they don't know anything outside of maybe a few verses in the Bible, right? They don't even know the Bible.
Well, they get so defensive, probably.
And they do, because they don't know how to defend it. And honestly, when you know how to defend something, you're not even mad at the other person for what they're saying. You don't even care if they think differently than you. You're like, you know what? You make some valid points. I know why you make these valid points, because of what you read and what you've studied or what you follow. But this is why I think differently, because I do know these things. Just to throw a shameless plug of the new film that we just got finished shooting that you were a part of. I'm really glad you're a part of. It's called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast. And we won't reveal anything about what the movie's about, but that film's built on a lot of research from you, myself, Isaac Weishaupt, Justin from Crippers of the Corn. A lot of us came together with all this research that we've done. And I'm a Christian, and the entire movie's built on the premise of a lot of Crowley's teachings. But for me to come to the conclusion at the end of the film of this worldview that I have, I had to go down that rabbit hole of Crowley for like 8 months and really dig into who that man was. And the more I understood who that man was, I understood why that he thought the way he did. A lot of people don't know his childhood was pretty jacked up. Matter of fact, his father had an illness that was like a tooth illness, and it could have been easily fixed if he went to the doctor. But he's hanging out with these Puritans who said, no, we got this special electromagnetic thing, and it's God's telling us to do it. Let's do it. His father dies. So from that moment on, he made his life's mission to try to take out Christianity. And he had every right to feel that way. Think about being a young child and you see this happen. And he already had a disdain for the church because he saw the money going in and out of the church, because he came from money. So obviously he's going to see that seedier side of it. So yeah, of course, he had very valid reasons to go down the road that he went. And I think that Christians have a hard time doing that because they, don't understand literature. They don't even understand their own literature, which is really sad. I mean, I guarantee you, you could go up to Christians at a church and ask how many of them actually read the Bible front to end. And I guarantee you'd be a super small percentage.
I haven't. I mean,
right.
I've probably read more apocryphal text than the actual Bible itself. So, I'm pretty.
They don't even know it. They don't even know it. So that's just a little side note there on why I think that we should take on other literature, because it helps us understand our own worldview, and at times will help change our own worldview to where I'm seeing something a little differently, or I'm opening my mind up to the possibility of something else and saying, you know what, how I thought originally, these texts don't really add up. Even like biblical texts, sometimes I'm reading like, man, I never thought about that. That's something that's literally in the Bible that people don't have a clue about, and they think that it's one thing and they don't actually know the deeper meaning of the text or understand the Hebrew. A lot of times people don't understand the Hebrew versions of words will imply something vastly different in the text. And I think it's important to do that deep research. And I'm not saying everybody has to. I'm just saying that if you want to be able to speak from a level of understanding, or talk to someone who thinks differently than you, understand how they think, understand what they read. That's why I try to stay read up on a lot of different subjects and a lot of different things. So I think that it helps us either solidify our worldview or it opens our minds up to a different possibility. And I think that's with anything, even like we've been talking about this whole episode, conspiracy theories, the same thing. Like, don't buy into them. Go into it, look into it, see what you like about it, see what you don't like about it, and then go live your life, man.
Make up your own assumptions. Yeah.
Back to St. Augustine. This is another one of these big figures in the church. And this was he lived around 354 AD, and he was a bishop in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, he was one of the most influential of the early Christian fathers. He spoke of the existence of the Cynocephali and other strange races, and he claimed that he personally preached the gospel to them. Though his accounts, they became recognized as morally dumb and sometimes demonic, but always redeemable. So here's him talking about these dog-headed men, and he thinks that they came from a demonic source, but he thinks that they could be redeemed. He said, no, I've met them. I know they can be redeemed. I know they can make their own decision for themselves. So that plays into what I think about Nephilim in general and these hybrids in general that have a level of intelligence that they can make their own decision, that God would allow them to also have a pathway to him. And I don't need to go into my good Nephilim theory today, but that does play into that as well. Now, going to Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus. So Marco Polo stated that he went to the Agamemnian island, and he said, these people are without a king and are idolaters. That sounds pretty classic Marco Polo. He's going to automatically say that they're evil and no better than wild beasts. And I assure you, all the men of the island of Agamemnium have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes likewise. In fact, in the face, they are just as big mastiff dogs. And they have a quantity of spices, but they're a most cruel generation and eat everybody they can catch, if not of their own race. Now, we could say that he was dehumanizing here. I mean, it's not a stretch to say that. The only problem is he's super descriptive in how they look like. They have these dog heads. They look like mastiffs. They have long snouts. He's specifically saying this about these creatures. And listen, he had no qualms about running up and killing random people if he wanted to take over an area. So, and he talked about them as regular people.
And
so
they had war dogs too. They were known for their giant dogs. So that's interesting that, speaking of Dogmen and that connection there.
Absolutely. And Christopher Columbus also talks about these Cynocephali when he was in India and Persia. And he said that he was in Haiti. So this is in the 15th century. He goes to Haiti to an unwelcome and hostile situation where he claimed to see men with one eye and others with dog noses who were cannibals, and that when they captured an enemy, they beheaded them, drank his blood, and cut off his private parts. Now, again, we could look at a level of dehumanization here. Absolutely. I'm not throwing that possibility out.
I mean, they're eating cats and dogs even today, so.
Yeah, according to some people. But I will say that, again, super descriptive on them looking like a dog, whereas they don't do that in all of the other places that they conquer. So they go to a specific place, and it's not like Christopher Columbus didn't show up other places where there were black people or indigenous people of all colors, and he specifically says this about them. He ran up another place and said they were cannibals. Of course, he's going to put that moniker on anybody he wants to wipe out, because it just makes sense to the church why he wants to wipe people out. But he makes a point here to, just like Marco Polo, in this one specific area, here are these dog-headed, one-eyed creatures, which is weird. I say it's weird. I'm not saying that it's necessarily, a for sure thing, but it's a little weird in conjunction with the other historians that have talked about these similar creatures. If it was just them talking about it, I could easily discard it and say, well, yeah, they're just, saying these people look a certain way to justify them wiping these people out. I don't think so. I think that if we look at it in conjunction with the other historians, then we can say, well, maybe there's something to it. And I will end with Rabanus from Corby. and this is very interesting right here. He's a Frankish monk of the monastery of Corbie. And he was best known for his writings on the Eucharist and predestination. So this guy, his theology still permeates the modern church. So he is known as this huge historical figure within the Christian church. So he talks about the Cynocephali as well. One of the monks asked him, "What do I do when I encounter the dog heads? Can I save their souls? Do I preach to them or do I look at them as animals?" The church clearly claimed they were beasts. Rabanus was concerned, and he consulted his elder in a letter on the dog-headed creatures. Wrote a letter that we know about these dog-headed creatures, and he tries to persuade his superior that the dog heads were in fact sons of Adam and that they should be allowed to convert to Christianity and not treated as animals. So here's this major historical figure who's talking about these Cynocephalists and telling the church that no, they don't need to be wiped out. Not that the church listened, but he's telling them that no, they are capable of being redeemed. And I thought that was very interesting. Here's another historical character from the church who is saying that no, they have redemptive qualities. They operate just like you and I.
Interesting, dude. I'm gonna have to check out the other apocryphal Jasher and some of the other apocryphal texts, and we're gonna have to get back again together. So I mean, we're getting together soon here in a couple of weeks to do something for your show, which people can check out. Can you plug your website one more time for us, bro, so people can go check you out? And yeah. Once I come out with that episode on your show, I'll plug it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the easiest place to get to everything is just go to Linktree/Joel Thomas Media. Everything's up there you can get to as far as YouTube goes, and Spotify, Apple, all that for the podcast, music as well. But if you're looking to just get directly to stuff, generally speaking, you're just going to type in Free the Rabbits or Free the Rabbits podcast. So if you go to YouTube and you're looking to watch my episodes every Friday at 12 p.m., the video is released where I do the episode. You can go to YouTube/Free the Rabbits or Rumble/Free the Rabbits. But if you're just looking to listen to it, if you're driving or you're at work or whatever, just type in Free the Rabbits on any platform that you listen to podcasts. So I drop those every Friday at 12 a.m. if you're trying to listen to it. So if you're trying to watch it, 12 p.m., because we do a premiere very similar to what you do, and I'll chat with everybody in the chat room and we'll have a good old time. But as far as the audio goes, it comes out at 12 a.m. every Friday, and you can check me out there.
Links down in the description. This won't be the last time you see Joel on the show, so make sure to send me your links, Joel. I don't have your link. Do you have a link tree or anything like that? Is that what you got going on?
Yeah, I got the link tree right now. That'll get you to pretty much everywhere if you're looking to get to anything that I do. All the films, too. And I did mention it earlier, but we've got a killer film that's going to come out first quarter next year. I actually saw a first bit of it yesterday. Nice. So I'm getting pretty jacked about it. It ended up being one of the best films we've done, and I will say it's very different than anything we've done because it was such a combination of research and then boots on the ground. So I was in 4 different places for this film. I was in Connecticut, I was in Upper Ohio, Michigan, and Utah. So I was in all these different areas, gathering information, interviewing different people, and I was very fortunate to have some great researchers into the occult like yourself and Isaac, because you guys always bring a lot to the table when it comes to some of the ideas that I had going into this film, and this idea of the melon heads and where they may have actually originated from. So it's going to be an interesting one. And just to say, I don't think I've told you this, we caught something, probably the most significant thing we've ever caught on camera. So it's pretty wild. It's hard to even describe, and I won't tell anybody what it is because I want them to see it when the film comes out. But yeah, it's a nice combination.
It was me, bro. I'm sorry to tell you, it was me. I was in the woods that day. You caught me, but yeah, I'm excited to finally see that. I was happy to be a part of it, and I'm excited for what the future holds. But yeah, people can check me out at the One-on-One Podcast on pretty much all social media platforms. Live every Tuesday night. Twitch.tv/one-on-one podcast or one-on-one media YouTube channel. All the links are in the description. And as you would say, go outside, touch some grass, get your head out of the hole, and go live life. Have fun while on these rabbit holes, but don't let it consume you. And as always, everyone, catch you on the next one on the other side, wherever we are. Later.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow.